Chapter 1977 Sword Technique. Chapter 1977 Sword Technique. The Empress, Hu Niu, and Yang Xianlu also wore expressions of eagerness. Prodigies would seldom admit defeat. Ling Han released bewitching Maiden Ru from the Black Tower as well, and the five of them all walked toward the stone tablet. Wang. Flashes of sword light slashed over again. However, Ling Han was prepared this time, and he immediately waved his right hand, launching a counterattack at the flashes of sword light. He wasn't reactively defending. With Ling Han's example, the Empress and the others also emulated his actions. They all unleashed powerful celestial techniques. Peng, 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 peng. There were flashes of brilliant light as the first wave of attacks from the stone tablet ended. Even though they had been prepared, they were still sent sliding back far into the distance. None of them had managed to advance. These flashes of sword light were extremely overwhelming and powerful. However, even though they had all been pushed back, the distance that they had been pushed back was different. For example, Ling Han had been pushed back the least. This time, he had only been pushed back 200 or so steps. After him was Hu Niu, who had been pushed back a dozen or so steps more than him. After her, the Empress had been pushed back 7 more steps. Yang Xianlu fell a further 20 or so steps behind. Last was bewitching Maiden Ru, who had been pushed back a whopping 600 steps. It was because Ling Han had already faced this attack once that he had been pushed back the least. Discounting him, the strength of the others was clear for all to see. Come again, Hu Niu shouted in excitement. She immediately dashed forward. Ling Han and the others also charged forward again. Peng, peng, peng. Each time they charged forward, they would be pushed back by the attacks of the stone tablet. However, Ling Han, Hu Niu, and the Empress were being pushed back a shorter and shorter distance. In other words, they were continually advancing with each charge. Meanwhile, Yang Xianlu and bewitching Maiden Ru were also advancing. However, their advance was incredibly slow, especially bewitching Maiden Ru's. Tang Minglong involuntarily stroked his beard upon seeing this. His wrinkles became less bunched together, and it was as if he were feeling extremely delighted. It was not in vain for me to battle against that person and exhaust several of his trump cards. When these young ones grow up, they'll definitely become the main pillars to resist the storm of darkness, he said in his mind. At this moment, he suddenly clutched at his chest. His body shuddered, and his face instantly became as white as a sheet. Blood seeped from his fingers. Even after reincarnating and recultivating, and even though we're both at the 5th severance, the gulf between him and me is still so great. Who would have thought? I didn't die while battling against the storm of darkness, yet I'll actually die here. So be it. I can lay to eternal rest in my homeland, so I can at least die with a smile. Moreover, as long as these youths can grow up, what does it matter even if I die? Did I not battle in that place for countless years to protect this piece of land? He turned around, preventing Ling Han and the others from witnessing his miserable state. With a leap, he quickly vanished without a trace. Just like Ji Wuming had said before, it was impossible for Tang Minglong to kill him. Meanwhile, he would only need to exhaust a single trump card to kill Tang Minglong. However, Ji Wuming had clearly miscalculated, and he had ended up exhausting more than one trump card. This was also why Ji Wuming hadn't targeted Ling Han just then, even though he knew that Ling Han possessed some incredible treasure. He had expended far too many trump cards, so it would have been impossible for him to suppress Ling Han. He hadn't spared Ling Han out of goodwill. Ling Han glanced over, and he couldn't help but feel surprised. Tang Minglong left just like that. He wasn't aware of what had happened before, so he simply thought that Tang Minglong had arrived here earlier, and already mastered this sword technique. Thus, he didn't pay much heed to this. If others didn't provoke him, he naturally wouldn't provoke them, either. Ling Han returned his attention to the stone tablet. Shio, shio, shio. Bursts of sword light slashed over again. Ling Han humphed as he extended his right hand, and counterattacked with the regulation of slaughter. Peng, 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 peng. This was a fierce exchange, and Ling Han continued to slide back. However, he only retreated 7 steps in total before stabilizing himself. He then launched a ferocious counterattack as he pushed forward with determination. He could already resist the full might of the heaven-destroying 9 swords. At the very least, he could resist the might of these 4 words. This sword technique was incredibly powerful, and it was more so created on the foundation of the regulation of slaughter. Ling Han was delighted upon discovering this. This was because he already had a solid grasp of the regulation of slaughter, and he had also obtained the true meaning of the Great Tao just then. In the future, he could definitely obtain a comprehensive grasp of the regulation of slaughter. Combined with the heaven-destroying 9 swords, he could definitely unleash the full might of the regulation of slaughter. Moreover, just the words heaven-destroying 9 swords alone could already allow Ling Han to taste a powerful sword intent, as well as a certain influence from the regulation of slaughter. He had a feeling that he could also unleash such a sword technique. Enlightenment instantly arose in his mind. The words on this stone tablet were not for one to comprehend. Instead, these words would directly transform into attacks to battle against those who arrived before them. In this way, one could comprehend the heaven-destroying 9 swords through actual battle. If one wasn't strong enough, they would end up being trapped in the outer regions. If that were the case, they could only settle for comprehending the words heaven-destroying 9 swords. Interesting. Then let's test out how powerful the following sword technique is. Ling Han stepped forward. This time, the second row of symbols of the stone tablet lit up. Shio, shio, shio. These symbols transformed into 7 swords that slashed over, and each of them was brimming with a murderous aura. It was as if they lusted for blood. Ling Han reached over to counterattack. He didn't draw on the power of the Black Tower, and he was instead relying on his own strength. Ding, 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 ding. There was a series of crisp clanking sounds. During this exchange, bursts of sword light soared into the sky, severing the clouds and seemingly aiming to shatter the heavens. Ling Han was forced to retreat again. This was only the second row of symbols, yet its might was already several times greater than that of the first. As such, he had underestimated it, and this had resulted in him being pushed back further than anticipated. Haha, come again. Ling Han immediately charged forward again. Boom. Flames burst from his body, and it was clear that he had already activated the power of his divine fetus. This elevated his battle prowess by a significant amount. Wang. The attacking swords shuddered, and it was as if they had been enraged. They started to frenziedly slash down at Ling Han. Ling Han continued to resist. With the 9 heavens flame dancing around him, it was as if he were an indestructible god of fire. When he punched, it was as if he could combust the entire heaven and earth. His might was formidable and domineering. However, the heaven-destroying 9 swords wasn't weak, either. It became locked in a ferocious battle with Ling Han. Boom, boom, boom. This was a strange battle, and it was hard to determine who was enjoying the advantage. Only bursts of devastating light continued to soar into the sky, continuously exploding like fireworks. At the same time, symbols of the Great Tao also continued to materialize and explode, with their destructive power simply overwhelming and astonishing. After battling for almost 7 days, Ling Han finally gained the upper hand. He slowly walked forward, forcefully pushing the sword attacks back as he did so. However, when he reached some limit, the second row of symbols suddenly dimmed down. Surprisingly, however, the third row of symbols didn't light up. It was as if the stone tablet were malfunctioning. What's going on? Did the ancient battle between the celestial kings damage this stone tablet? Ling Han stroked his chin in thought. He then glanced over at Hunyo and the others. Right now, Hunyo and the Empress had also entered the second region, meaning that they were also facing the attacks from the second row of symbols. Hunyo was unleashing her rock secret technique, while the Empress had summoned all 9 of her doppelgangers. Meanwhile, Yang Xianlu was still in the first region. However, he was already on the verge of entering the second region. As for bewitching Maiden Ru, she was still far behind him. She was essentially still stuck at the starting point. A thought suddenly occurred to Ling Han. He retreated before charging forward again. Shio, shio, shio. Sword attacks swept over, carrying with them a tumultuous aura of murder. Ling Han drew his divine demon sword, and activated the sword technique that he had learned just then, the first technique of the heaven-destroying 9 swords. Something's changed. Ling Han immediately made a discovery. Even though the attacking swords were still as powerful as before, it was as if their hostility toward him had decreased by a slight amount. They had become slightly gentler. Chapter 1978, The Ninth Sword is Gone. Chapter 1978, The Ninth Sword is Gone. Ling Han came to a sudden realization. This stone tablet was indeed here to pass down the heaven-destroying 9 swords. However, after passing the second region, why wasn't the third row of symbols lighting up? This was because the stone tablet was teaching him the heaven-destroying 9 swords. Thus, wasn't it natural for him to resist using the heaven-destroying 9 swords that he had just learned? Sure enough, once Ling Han started to use heaven-destroying 9 swords, even the attacks from the second row of symbols started to become more gentle. It was like a teacher guiding their disciple. No matter how fierce this teacher seemed, it was simply being strict with its own disciples. With this realization, Ling Han turned around and said to the Empress and Hu Niu, "Resist using the heaven-destroying 9 swords that you've just learned." Both of them were smart people, and they more so held absolute trust in Ling Han. Thus, they immediately did as he said. However, this was a sword technique that they had only just learned, so how much of its might could they truly unleash? Even though the attacks from the second row were gentler now, Ling Han and the others were still pushed back further and further. Ling Han was completely unfazed. He simply unleashed the first technique of the heaven-destroying 9 swords as he also mulled over it in his mind. As he retreated, his grasp over the heaven-destroying 9 swords also became stronger and stronger. In fact, there were even times when he would retreat into the distance to enter the Black Tower, where he would ponder under the reincarnation tree for a while before coming back out. The Empress and Hu Niu also did the same. 7 days later, the 3 of them passed through the second region at almost the exact same time. Wang, Wang, Wang. The third row of symbols lit up, materializing into 3 sword-wielding people. Without any nonsense, they couldn't speak anyway. These 3 people immediately charged over and attacked. Sure enough, this was the correct method. Ling Han laughed heartily as he brandished his divine demon sword and unleashed the heaven-destroying 9 swords. Clang, clang, clang. Swords clashed, releasing a crisp clanging sound even though Ling Han was clearly fighting against a projection. This was a clash of the great Tao, a clash which could shake both heaven and earth. This was a ferocious battle. Like before, Ling Han and the others would fight for a while before stopping for a while. Occasionally, they would also enter the Black Tower to further comprehend the sword techniques. One day in the outside world was equivalent to 100 days of deep thought under the reincarnation tree. Coupled with their smarts, their progress was naturally shooting forward in leaps and bounds. When they reached the 5th region, Yang Xianlu had only just entered the 2nd region. Meanwhile, bewitching Maiden Ru was still stuck in her original spot, unable to advance a single inch. This was the gulf between them. Ling Han would occasionally glance back to check on her progress, and he couldn't help but sigh in his mind. Bewitching Maiden Ru had initially been a king tier. After obtaining the help of the heavenly Tao Jade, she had mended her path of cultivation, and advanced to become an emperor tier. Moreover, she had become a top-notch emperor tier. Yet, even top-notch emperor tiers surprisingly didn't have the right to learn the heaven-destroying 9 sword. At most, they could only learn the first technique. The celestial king who created this sword technique had definitely been an extremely proud being. In his mind, only monarch tiers had the right to inherit his sword technique. As for other also-rans, he would rather this sword technique be lost than be inherited by them. Moreover, this was definitely a high-level celestial king. 7th heaven, 8th heaven, 9th heaven. Ling Han became increasingly astonished. He had already come across several reincarnations of celestial kings. In other words, there was a significant chance that many celestial kings would still die. This was completely different from his expectation of the celestial realm. In his mind, celestial kings should have been eternal and indestructible. He forcefully suppressed the puzzlement in his mind. Right now, his most important task was to master this sword technique. In any case, His questions would eventually be answered following his advance in cultivation level. As he pushed forward, the projections summoned by the stone tablet became increasingly powerful. In turn, it also became increasingly difficult to master the heaven-destroying 9 swords. During his 3rd year here, Ling Han suddenly stopped to glance back. Someone else had come. It was Shu Yarong and the others. They had finally finished analyzing the paths and found the correct route to reach this place. However, it was a shame that just a few forks in the path had delayed them by over 2 years. The gulf between them and Ling Han was far too large. This was also a direct reflection of the reincarnation tree's incredible usefulness. This was the impressive nature of the source powers of heaven and earth. Upon seeing Ling Han, expressions of anger spread across Shu Yarong's and the others' faces. If they had followed Ling Han, they could have arrived here over 2 years ago. Would they have needed to waste so much time? Ling Han only needed to lead the way. Would that bring him any loss? Was there any need for him to be so petty? They were merely considering this problem from their own point of view. As a result, they started to feel aggrieved and wronged. However, why didn't they consider this from Ling Han's point of view? Why did he need to bring them here? Not to mention that they were fighting for treasures in a mystery realm, they would at least need to thank him for pointing out the correct path even in the outside world, right? Ling Han simply replied with a smile. He had no time for these people. Anyhow, Shu Yarong and the others naturally noticed the stone tablet as well. They hurriedly walked over to start battling with the heaven-destroying 9 swords. However, it was a shame that only Shu Yarong had obtained the true meaning of the great Tao pertaining to the regulation of slaughter among them. Thus, how could they possibly hope to learn the heaven-destroying 9 swords through simple battle? Of course, this was unless they possessed heaven-defying talent and aptitude. Otherwise, it was simply impossible for them to learn the heaven-destroying 9 swords. Even so, they were still unwilling to give up. After all, this was a paramount sword technique, so how could they abandon it just like that? Thus, they continued to persist with their futile struggle. Ling Han turned his attention back to the battle at hand. Even though the humanoid projections looked ferocious, they were actually very good teachers. Time and time again, they continued to fully exhibit the complete essence of the heaven-destroying 9 swords. Another year passed, and even bewitching Maiden Ru saw a significant improvement, finally advancing to the 2nd region. However, apart from Shu Yarong, the rest of the newcomers all remained stuck in the 1st region. Living up to her name as the 2nd greatest prodigy of the wide prosperity heaven and her status as the reincarnation of a celestial king, Shu Yarong had already advanced to the 3rd region, rivaling the progress of Yang Xianlu. At this time, however, Ling Han, the Empress, and Hu Niu had already been battling in the 8th region for a very long time. Once they passed this region, they would be able to learn the final technique of the heaven-destroying 9 swords. Boom! Ling Han was the first to enter the 9th region. As he swung his divine demon sword, a humanoid projection was viciously obliterated from existence. A boundless murderous aura emanated from his body, and with a confident stride, he finally entered the 9th region. However, the 9th row of symbols didn't light up. What's going on? Ling Han was slightly surprised. He had clearly arrived here by using the heaven-destroying 9 swords, so why was there no reaction from the stone tablet? He observed the stone tablet carefully, and he finally discovered that the 9th row of symbols was incomplete. It was damaged by someone? He glanced over it again, and he immediately shook his head. The stone tablet hadn't been damaged by anyone. Instead, it was incomplete in the first place. Perhaps the Celestial King hadn't been able to create the 9th technique. Or perhaps he had suddenly changed his mind while carving the symbols for the 9th technique. Without the willpower of a Celestial King, the 9th row of symbols was dull and lifeless. Moreover, it looked like a jumble of meaningless scribbles. Ling Han had no option but to stop. It was also at this moment that the stone tablet suddenly collapsed with a resounding boom. It was as if it were laying to eternal rest after successfully imparting its inheritance. All of the sword light and humanoid projections instantly vanished. What did you do? A monarch tear from the wide prosperity heaven roared at Ling Han. He was called Ma Lugang, and he was ranked 8th among the prodigies from the wide prosperity heaven. What did I do? Ling Han rubbed his nose. This person was clearly blaming him for the collapse of the stone tablet. Although this was likely true, it was not something of his explicit doing. Instead, it was a result of the Celestial King's decision. Once someone mastered the 8th technique, the stone tablet would automatically crumble. As such, what did this have to do with him? Not to mention that he didn't know about this. Even if he did, was there any obligation for him to stop? Did he need to wait for them to learn the heaven-destroying 9 swords? What an absolute joke. Don't blame me for demeaning you, but you trash couldn't have mastered this sword technique anyway, Ling Han said in a serious voice. Chapter 1979, Killing the Chicken to Warn the Monkeys. Chapter 1979, Killing the Chicken to Warn the Monkeys. Ling Han truly wasn't deprecating them. Rather, without learning the true meaning of the regulation of slaughter, it was genuinely impossible for these people to learn the heaven-destroying 9 swords. They would merely be wasting their time. This had nothing to do with talent. Of course, this was unless one possessed heaven-defying talent. The prodigies from the wide prosperity heaven were enraged upon hearing this. Not only had Ling Han destroyed the stone tablet and prevented them from learning the sword technique, but he was even calling them trash. Ling Han smiled and said, "What? You're not resigned to this? Then come, see how I pummel you people." The prodigies from the wide prosperity heaven faltered upon hearing this. They then looked toward Shu Yarong. Of everyone present, only Shu Yarong could rival Ling Han. However, Shu Yarong remained silent. After all, Ji Wuming had already said that he would personally take Ling Han's life. Thus, let alone targeting Ling Han, she might even help him if he were facing a life-threatening situation. A wide grin spread across Ling Han's face. He wouldn't be afraid even if Shu Yarong truly targeted him. During their battle with Ji Wuming, he had already observed her battle prowess clearly. At most, she was only as powerful as him. Of course, this was ignoring any trump cards that she might have. He swept his gaze over Ma Lugang and the others, and said, "As men, it's best for you not to rely on a woman. If you have balls, then come at me." Ma Lugang jumped forward, and said, "Do you really think you're invincible?" He knew that he was no match for Ling Han. However, exchanging 10 or 100 blows with him shouldn't be any problem at all. Thus, he decided to exchange a few blows with Ling Han. After winning some face back, he would then retreat and leave. Ling Han immediately shot forward. Whoosh! Like a bolt of lightning, he instantly appeared before Ma Lugang. He then reached over to grab at his face. "Impudence!" Ma Lugang roared. He replied with a palm strike of his own. "You're indeed stronger than me. However, you still can't underestimate me like this." A smile of ridicule tugged at the corners of Ling Han's lips. Drawing on the power of the Black Tower, he immediately activated the power of time. Ma Lugang's movements instantly slowed down. Time was flowing at a slower pace. With Ling Han's current power, he simply needed to decrease Ma Lugang's speed by a limited amount. Reaching over, he easily grabbed onto Ma Lugang's face and directly lifted him up. He faced no resistance at all. Fuck! A cold chill ran down the spines of the prodigies from the wide prosperity heaven. Ma Lugang was the 8th-ranked monarch tier of the wide prosperity heaven. Even though he was no match for the top 3 freaks, was ranking inside the top 10 not freakish enough already? Yet, he couldn't even withstand a single strike from Ling Han. Had Ling Han been this powerful before? Ling Han was naturally using this opportunity to assert his might and dominance. Otherwise, it would be beneath him to draw on the power of the Black Tower to target a weakling. Mph, Ma Lugang started to thrash about, yet this was in absolute vain. His face was filled with fury and embarrassment. As a mighty monarch tier, he had actually been captured in a single exchange. This made him look like a complete fool for what he had said before. This was utterly humiliating. If you're so weak, then obediently stand aside. Don't charge into your own death, Ling Han said in a baleful voice. He was radiating with ice-cold killing intent. Ling Han, release him, Shu Yarong chided. She wouldn't attack Ling Han, but this didn't mean that she would remain indifferent to him killing prodigies from the wide prosperity heaven. Ling Han glanced at her, and said in a calm voice, "Do I know you? Don't test my patience." Shu Yarong replied with an ice-cold expression. Crack. With a tightening of his grip, Ling Han instantly snapped Ma Lugang's neck. Ma Lugang shuddered for a moment before falling completely limp. So what if he was a monarch tier? He only had one life. You. Shu Yarong was wild with rage. Boom. Her silky black hair started to billow even though there was no wind. She was burning with flames of fury. Ling Han clasped his hands behind his back, and said, "You what? Do I owe you anything? Don't command me to do this and that. I can do whatever I want." Shu Yarong clenched her hands into fists. If she'd still possessed the power of celestial kings, she would have instantly captured Ling Han. At that time, she would have complete authority over his life. Now, however, there was nothing she could do. Leave. She gritted her teeth and growled. The stone tablet had already been destroyed, so there was no point staying on this second mountain peak any longer. A feeling of grief and sorrow welled up in the hearts of the prodigies from the wide prosperity heaven. As they looked at Ling Han taking the spatial god tools from Ma Lugang's body, they were completely powerless to stop him. They could only turn around and leave. Boom. A ball of 9 heavens flame burst forth from Ling Han's hands, incinerating Ma Lugang's corpse. With Ma Lugang's death, the animosity between them also vanished. Thus, Ling Han would allow him to peacefully return to the embrace of heaven and earth. Hu Niu leaped onto Ling Han, and said, "Bad Ling Han." Niu was only a step away from mastering the 8th technique. Ling Han chuckled, and said, "No worries. I'll teach you guys in the future." The stone tablet had indeed disappeared. However, he had already obtained the full inheritance of the 8 sword techniques. After reaching a certain height, perhaps he could even create the 9th technique by himself. "I definitely can," Ling Han said in his mind. He had obtained the true meaning of the regulation of slaughter, and he had also learned the first 8 techniques of the heaven-destroying 9 swords. Thus, as long as he completely mastered these, creating the 9th sword technique would only be a matter of time. "Brother Ling, I'm also relying on you," Yang Xianlu said shamelessly. The heaven-destroying 9 swords was incredibly powerful. After all, this was a technique that was built on the foundation of the regulation of slaughter. Before reaching the level of Celestial King, this technique was even stronger than those of the 5 elements and the regulation of lightning. Ling Han chuckled in reply. He didn't agree or disagree. If he had time, he wouldn't mind teaching Yang Xianlu. However, he was an extremely busy person, so it was impossible for him to remain in a single place for an extended amount of time. Thus, he didn't dare to make any promises. Fortunately, Yang Xianlu was only saying this in passing. Each person had their own opportunities and destiny, so this wasn't something that could be obtained by force. They started to descend the mountain. Ascending the mountain had been extremely difficult, yet descending it was as easy as could be. They could all remember the path that they had taken to get here, so descending was naturally a piece of cake. They headed toward the 3rd mountain peak. To their astonishment, the 3rd peak was incredibly easy to ascend. There was no powerful gravitational force, nor was there any maze to navigate. There was no monster to block their path, either. Thus, it only took them 7 days to reach the peak of this mountain. In reality, however, they hadn't reached the true peak of the mountain. This was because the mountain peak was cut off midway. Even so, it was still unbelievably tall. In any case, it was no wonder that there hadn't been any obstructions or difficulties. As it turned out, this mountain peak had already been annihilated. It was most likely damaged during the battle between the celestial kings. How astonishing! I truly wonder how astounding that battle was. I truly want to witness a battle between celestial kings. They all sighed with emotion before turning around to leave. Right now, there was only a single thing left for them to find the fiery flame lightning strike wood, a source power of heaven and earth. However, this valley was so incredibly large, so how would they find it? Then, let's just casually stroll around, Ling Han said. The Empress, Hu Niu, and bewitching maiden Ru naturally wouldn't oppose this. Meanwhile, Yang Xianlu decided to split paths with them. First of all, he didn't want to interrupt Ling Han and his family. Second of all, they were looking for the fiery flame lightning strike wood, and this was completely up to each person's luck. This wasn't determined by strength. One of the annoying people has finally left. However, the other one is still here. Hunyo said as she looked at Bewitching Maiden Ru. However, Bewitching Maiden Ru was extremely thick-skinned, and she didn't pay any heed to this. This caused Hunyo's eyes to glint with anger again. The four of them started to casually stroll around. In this colossal valley, they truly didn't know where to go. Perhaps they might have to wait here for several hundred years, or even several thousand years. Fortunately, the Three Blooms Valley had no limit on how long they could remain. There was no rule that they had to leave after a certain number of years, or risk facing a fatal punishment. This allowed them to stroll around at a leisurely pace. However, for a source power of heaven and earth, this was completely worth it. The valley was crawling with monsters that were filled with spikes. However, to Ling Han and the others, these monsters weren't an annoyance. Instead, they were a source of treasures. They possessed celestial king bloodstones that contained the regulation of slaughter, and these were treasures that were as valuable as a city. In the blink of an eye, 7 years had already passed. Ling Han and the others hadn't wasted this time, and they had instead used it to strengthen their grasp of the regulation of slaughter and the heaven-destroying 9 swords. Crack! A bolt of lightning suddenly descended from the sky, giving Ling Han and the others a fright. Chapter 1980 Fiery Flame Lightning Strike Wood. Chapter 1980 Fiery Flame Lightning Strike Wood. This bolt of lightning had descended far too suddenly. Moreover, its might was overwhelming, and just its aura alone was enough to chill one to the core. At the very least, Ling Han was certain that he would have been killed if he had been struck by this lightning. "This is heavenly tribulation," Ling Han exclaimed. Even though this bolt of lightning had descended from above them, it had eerily avoided them in a mysterious manner. There could only be a single reason. This was heavenly tribulation, and it would only target a certain individual. Thus, as long as others didn't interfere, it wouldn't attack them regardless of how close they were to the target. Of course, if heavenly tribulation sent shards of rocks flying everywhere, the heavens naturally wouldn't take responsibility for those who were wounded by these rocks. However, none of them had ascended to the next level, so why was heavenly tribulation suddenly descending? Moreover, it was such a devastating heavenly tribulation. "Fiery flame lightning strike wood," they exclaimed in unison. Only this wondrous matter would attract tribulation after tribulation. If it weren't being blazed by flames, it would be suffering the wrath of lightning. Thus, this sudden and unexpected heavenly tribulation could only point to a single thing. It was almost certain that the fiery flame lightning strike would have been struck by lightning again. Just then, they had only witnessed a sliver of the shockwave. If that's the case, they looked up, only to see a vast expanse of clouds and mists. Ling Han took a deep breath and gathered all of his strength. He then drew his divine demon sword, and unleashed a slash at the sky. Boom! A burst of sword light arced through the sky, brimming with a tumultuous and murderous aura. The clouds and mists were violently ripped apart, revealing an expanse of clear blue sky. As if they possessed life, however, the clouds and mists started to rapidly squirm and fuse, causing the sky to become grey and hazy again. However, that short instant was already enough for Ling Han and the others to see clearly. There was an indescribably colossal tree in the sky, and they were currently standing under the crown of this tree. No wonder an arc of lightning had crashed down. As it turned out, they were standing right under the fiery flame lightning strike wood. This was truly a case of looking for light under a lamp's shadow. They had been searching for the fiery flame lightning strike wood right under its shade. Judging by the shape of the tree's crown, the main trunk should be over there, Ling Han said as he pointed in a certain direction. "Millimeter HM, let's go." The four of them set off in that direction. Surprisingly, it took them 7 entire days to finally arrive before a pitch-black wall. Standing before this wall, one would realize that this wall wasn't entirely straight. Instead, there was a slight curve to it. More precisely, this was a circular wall. However, it was far too large, so from close up, It looked much like a flat wall. This was the fiery flame lightning strike wood. When they finally discovered that they were standing under the crown of the tree, perhaps they had already been traveling under it for several days. Yet, they had still needed to spend another 7 days to finally reach the base of its trunk. This was a direct reflection of the colossal nature of this tree. With the trunk of the tree being so colossal, could the crown of the tree be small? Ling Han reached over to place his hand on the tree trunk. Crackle! An arc of white lightning immediately shot over. Peng! Ling Han was sent flying back. Hunyeo hurriedly ran over and asked, "Ling Han, are you okay?" "I'm fine," Ling Han replied as he picked himself up. Even though he said this, his entire body was still trembling. The arcs of lightning on this fiery flame lightning strike wood couldn't be underestimated. Even though they weren't powerful enough to kill him, they could still cause him to tremble uncontrollably and make him feel extremely uncomfortable. "Come, everyone, give it a try. Let's see who can obtain this source power of heaven and earth," Ling Han said. Ling Han wanted to obtain this fiery flame lightning strike wood, yet he definitely wouldn't be greedy about it. He would give others a chance to try their luck. In any case, source powers of heaven and earth could only be obtained by those fated to it. The Empress and the others all nodded in reply. They distanced themselves from each other before facing the fiery flame lightning strike wood. Regarding how to obtain this treasure, this was completely up to each individual. Moreover, this was an extremely rare opportunity. After all, who knew when this fiery flame lightning strike wood might soar through the sky and tunnel through the earth to leave? Ling Han also walked over, channeling the indestructible heaven's scroll as he did so. Since this was a heavenly venerable tier cultivation technique, one which was transcendent above all Tao, it would theoretically be very attractive to source powers of heaven and earth. Wang! All 4 of them lit up with a brilliant glow. Symbols of the great Tao started to materialize on their bodies, yearning to achieve resonance with the fiery flame lightning strike wood so that they could receive its acknowledgement. However, the fiery flame lightning strike wood remained completely unresponsive. It was much like an ordinary tree, to which any expression and effort from them would be futile. However, Ling Han and the others didn't give up. As long as the fiery flame lightning strike wood remained here, they would still have a chance. In any case, how could a source power of heaven and earth be so easy to obtain? They continued to try. Several days passed, and a dense pattern of veins surprisingly started to glow on the tree. "There's a reaction." Ling Han and the others were delighted. They started to hurriedly pour more effort into their attempts. Shio! A streak of light suddenly slashed over from behind them. Ling Han humphed before jumping up and replying with a fist. Peng! The streak of light instantly shattered into pieces. However, the veined patterns on the fiery flame lightning strike would also stopped glowing. At the same time, the tree and earth also shuddered slightly, and it was as if the tree were about to uproot itself and fly away. Ling Han was infuriated upon seeing this. He looked over, only to see 6 people standing there. It was Xu Yarong and the prodigies from the wide prosperity heaven. They were truly like evil spirits that followed him around. Moreover, Ling Han's efforts had also been rendered futile by them. Not only that, but the fiery flame lightning strike would had even shown signs of fleeing. Ling Han wasn't opposed to competition. However, he sorely detested this kind of toxic competition. Not long ago, he had already killed Ma Lugang in a fit of rage. Now, these people were directly trampling on his bottom line. "You're seeking death." Ling Han charged over in rage. Since they dared to interfere, they were naturally prepared to accept his wrath. Boom! Wings of flames unfurled behind Ling Han, and with a flap, he already arrived before Xu Yarong and the others. He drew his divine demon sword, and immediately unleashed the heaven-destroying 9 swords. Whoosh! Bursts of sword light blazed into the surroundings. Xu Yarong humphed as she replied with a palm strike. The others also unleashed their attacks. With Xu Yarong keeping Ling Han occupied, they could wantonly attack to their heart's content. "So that's how you want it," Ling Han said with a cold chuckle. He activated his fire element divine fetus, immediately summoning a column of light from the sky. This column of light enveloped him, and it was impossible to describe the might that was radiating from this light. "Damn it! Hurry up and retreat," Shu Yarong yelled in a frantic voice. She immediately shot back in retreat. "Can you truly flee?" Ling Han asked in a cold voice. He unleashed the full power of his divine fetus. Boom! With him as the center, a wave of flames swept into the surroundings. Like a roaring fire dragon, these flames instantly caught up to Shu Yarong and the others. This was the most powerful attack of his divine fetus. Even though Ling Han could only unleash one such attack in a short period of time, the might of this attack was truly astonishing. The wave of flames gradually died down, revealing Ling Han's figure. His hands were clasped behind his back, and only a single person remained standing before him. It was naturally Shu Yarong. However, she was also in a sorry state, and much of her clothing was already destroyed and in tatters, revealing much of her snow-white skin. In fact, one could even see glimpses of her behind, waist, and chest. However, numerous symbols flashed across her skin, and these symbols covered her body as if they were clothes. She was panting in exertion, and a lot of her silky black hair had already been singed. She no longer wore an expression of nobility and calm, and she instead appeared as disheveled as could be. As for the other 5 prodigies, they had all been exterminated. Shu Yarong threw her head back and roared at the sky. Her beautiful face was filled with wild rage. The wide prosperity heaven had initially been brimming with prodigies. However, many of them had been engulfed by Ji Wuming, and now more of them had been killed by Ling Han. Almost all of them were now dead. This caused her to feel wild with rage. This was a calamity for the wide prosperity heaven, and it would definitely take them countless years to recover this vitality. "Naive Junior, you're actually showing such wanton disregard for the bigger picture," Shu Yarong said in a baleful voice. In her eyes, everything was for the sake of fighting against the storm of darkness. Thus, none of the top-notch prodigies could die. In fact, it would be best if they could all grow to become 9th heaven celestial kings. By slaughtering these prodigies, Ling Han was essentially slaughtering the future of the celestial realm. This caused Shu Yarong to boil with killing intent. Chapter 1981 Retreat. Chapter 1981 Retreat. Ling Han's expression was calm, and he said, "You can provoke me, but I'm not allowed to counterattack. Don't be such a hypocrite. If you want to battle, then come at me." Shu Yarong howled in fury as she charged over. She retrieved an ancient-looking mirror and pointed it at Ling Han, upon which a figure immediately crawled out from the mirror. Astonishingly, this figure was a mirror image of Ling Han. In fact, even its aura was exactly the same as Ling Han's. "Die!" the figure roared as it charged at Ling Han. Boom! Ling Han exchanged a punch with this figure, and he was instantly sent stumbling back. Only after retreating 17 steps did he finally come to a stop. They were evenly matched, with neither being stronger than the other. An expression of astonishment spread across Ling Han's face. This figure looked exactly the same as him, and it was also just as powerful as him. Sure enough, reincarnated celestial kings had all kinds of powerful techniques. With a long cry, Shu Yarong immediately lunged at Ling Han. The figure that she had summoned also lunged toward Ling Han. At this moment, Ling Han was facing the combined attacks of 2 incredibly powerful elites. He was instantly plunged into a perilous situation. "I refuse to believe that a measly treasure can replicate my full power," Ling Han said as he summoned his divine demon sword. He wanted to see if the figure could also summon a divine demon sword. Sure enough, the figure didn't draw a sword. However, it continued to replicate Ling Han's actions, using its fingers like a sword instead. It slashed its fingers down at Ling Han. Peng! 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 Ling Han exchanged blows with his 2 powerful opponents. He didn't need to say much about Shu Yarong's strength. She was the second most powerful prodigy of the wide prosperity heaven, and in her previous life, she had more so been a 7th heaven celestial king. Thus, she was naturally very powerful. Meanwhile, the figure that she had summoned possessed a strength that could rival his. It was as if heaven and earth had made a carbon copy of him. There was only a slight difference in the techniques that it used. In any case, They were a formidable duo who possessed overwhelming might. If their opponent were someone like Yang Xianlu, they could most likely obliterate them in a single strike. However, Ling Han's physique was far too powerful. Even though the attacks of his opponents had already reached the peak stage of the Yin Soul, even showing signs of reaching the Earth Soul, they could only draw a small amount of blood upon striking him. These attacks couldn't even break his bones, much less wound him. Ling Han roared with laughter, and shouted, "Come battle, come battle." He was filled with fighting spirit, and he was completely unafraid even though he was outnumbered. He was brimming with confidence. Ling Han unleashed the heaven-destroying 9 swords. If the figure could replicate even this sword technique, then it would be far too astonishing. After all, that would mean that Shu Yarong could easily obtain the heaven-destroying 9 swords from this figure. The figure instantly unleashed a sword technique. However, this wasn't the heaven-destroying 9 swords. Even so, the might of this sword technique couldn't be underestimated. Ling Han chuckled upon seeing this. Sure enough, this was only a treasured tool. Even though it was extraordinary, it was only able to replicate his aura and movements. It couldn't replicate his mind and techniques. He drew on the power of the Black Tower. Boom! Activating the regulation of slaughter and unleashing the heaven-destroying 9 swords, Ling Han ferociously slashed down at Shu Yarong. With the power of the Black Tower, the might of this slash was naturally unfathomable. Right now, the greatest power of the Black Tower was to stop time. If this ability could affect celestial kings, then Ling Han might even be able to slay celestial kings. Of course, even if this power was genuinely effective against celestial kings, it might only be effective for an infinitesimally short amount of time, so short that even ascending origin tier elites wouldn't notice it. Following this power to stop time, the regulation of slaughter and the regulation of space were also incredibly powerful. Most importantly, the regulation of slaughter shared a common origin with the heaven-destroying 9 swords. Thus, the might of this sword technique was buffed by a considerable amount. Swoosh! It was as if this slash could obliterate heaven and earth. Shu Yarong's expression involuntarily changed. The might of this slash instilled a sense of apprehension within her. She unleashed her full power to battle with Ling Han. Boom! 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 The 2 top-notch monarch tiers became locked in a ferocious battle. At this moment, neither of them could seize the upper hand. However, Ling Han was confident that if this continued, he would become the eventual victor. This was because his physique was far too powerful. He was already enjoying an indomitable position. Shu Yarong also noticed this. During this intense battle, she continued to suffer wound after wound. Meanwhile, even though Ling Han was also struck by her and the figure that she had summoned, he suffered almost no wounds at all. Even if he did, those were nothing but a mere scratch. Even though Shu Yarong was nowhere near losing her battle prowess, she was acutely aware that she would definitely end up in dire straits if this continued. Perhaps that would be in half a year, or perhaps that would be in 5 or 6 years. She gritted her teeth before suddenly turning around to leave. She abandoned this meaningless battle. She would kill Ling Han after advancing to the dividing soul tier. She was confident that she could do so. This was because she had been a celestial king in her previous life. Thus, she would immediately be able to wield an astonishing battle prowess upon advancing to the dividing soul tier. She would be far superior to ordinary dividing soul tier elites. She would let this person live for a few more days. She was extremely resolute, and she left with no hesitation at all. Did she not want the fiery flame lightning strike wood anymore? No, she naturally still wanted it. However, she didn't have to obtain it here. This tree was colossal, so where couldn't she obtain the fiery flame lightning strike wood from? Just then, she had arrived here by pure coincidence. However, she had also interrupted Ling Han and the others. Otherwise, the fiery flame lightning strike wood might have already been obtained by Ling Han. Ling Han pursued her for a few steps before giving up. His defenses were definitely invincible and unrivaled among those at the same cultivation level. In terms of battle prowess, however, the same was not necessarily the case. This was especially the case for speed. Shu Yarong had been a celestial king in her previous life, so she possessed a terrifying amount of celestial techniques. At the very least, she was extremely skilled in fleeing. In fact, this made a lot of sense. Becoming a celestial king wasn't easy, and thus the most important thing was definitely to protect oneself. Thus, it was understandable that they would spend a lot of time and effort on movement techniques. "Come, let's continue," Ling Han said with a smile. Bewitching Maiden Ru's eyes were filled with adoration and reverence. This man was far too extraordinary. In the beginning, he had only been an outstanding king tier. However, in a short period of time, he had already grown to become an invincible emperor tier. Even Yang Xianlu, widely acknowledged to be the #1 prodigy in the calm peace heaven, had been overshadowed by him. Now, Ling Han was even more impressive. Even the second-ranked prodigy from the wide prosperity heaven had been defeated by him. This kind of man, one who was so nice to her as well. Just what kind of divine treasure was the heavenly Dao Jade? This treasure had forcefully raised her from the level of king tier to the level of emperor tier. Who else in the world was so generous? "Woman, don't you dare have any indecent thoughts. Ling Han is Nyo's," Hu Nyo said through gritted teeth. Why were these women so shameless? She had only left for a short few years, yet they had already seized the opportunity to attach themselves to Ling Han. Detestable, truly detestable. "Let's continue," Ling Han said. He was well aware that Xu Yarong wouldn't give up so easily. She was definitely trying to obtain the fiery flame lightning strike wood from some other location. Moreover, she had a great chance of succeeding. This was because she was a reincarnated celestial king. As such, her essence was no weaker than that of the fiery flame lightning strike wood. In fact, it might even be stronger. Thus, they definitely couldn't let their guard down, and they had to obtain the fiery flame lightning strike wood as soon as possible. As long as they didn't obtain this treasure, they couldn't let their guard down. The four of them sat down again. They channeled their cultivation techniques, and they fully unleashed their power, attempting to attract the fiery flame lightning strike wood. The days flowed by. This time, however, the fiery flame lightning strike wood remained completely unresponsive. After being allured once, it was as if its standards had grown even higher. It wouldn't be attracted easily. Ling Han and the others didn't give up. Since they had already succeeded once, they naturally couldn't give up at such a critical time. 10 days, 1 month, 3 months. Time flew by. When they approached 100 days, a dense pattern of glowing veins finally appeared on the fiery flame lightning strike wood again. Who had attracted it? Chapter 1982, Collecting the Ancestral Tree. Chapter 1982, Collecting the Ancestral Tree. Celestial light entwined Ling Han and his group all around. They were all divine fetuses, but were of different attributes. Furthermore, they were all extremely powerful, and under the full power boost, their power of divine fetus was completely released to attract this source power of heaven and earth. To gain the recognition of a source power of heaven and earth, it had to be celestial king tier, at the very least. Divine fetus was the awakening of a celestial king tier bloodline. Only Ling Han was different. Though he was also stimulating the power of divine fetus, his true trump card was still the indestructible heaven scroll. This was a heavenly venerable tier-level cultivation technique, ranking above celestial king tier. The patterns on the fiery flame lightning strike would become brighter and brighter, and streaks of celestial light entwined around it, causing the whole tree to become incredibly magnificent, and making it appear in the midst of this foggy area. Who exactly was drawing on the ancestral tree? Wang, the fiery flame lightning strike would trembled lightly, and the tree's trunk suddenly began to shrink. At first, it was at a very slow rate, but only after a short while, the speed became extremely fast, and it was practically visible that this massive ancestral tree was shrinking, shrinking, and shrinking. It went from its initial colossal size that was so huge that the whole tree could not be taken in with a single look to becoming clearly within sight, and then turning into a small sapling. Turning from a tree into a sapling, what did this mean? The ancestral tree had already made its decision, planning to recognize someone as its master. Who was it? Xiao, the fiery flame lightning strike would suddenly uprooted itself from the ground. It was but 3 inches tall, yet was incredibly crystalline. Every single tree leaf bore fiery flames and lightning, a sight to behold. What caused the expressions of Ling Han and the others to change drastically was that the fiery flame lightning strike wood was actually flying slowly in a direction away from them. Was it Shu Yarong? This woman indeed could not be underestimated. Now that she was given the chance to make her move, it actually drew on the ancestral tree of heaven and earth. However, it was clear that the fiery flame lightning strike wood was still hesitating. Otherwise, it would have directly streaked through the air towards Shu Yarong instead of wavering and hesitating here. There was still hope. In fact, this was where the true contest began. Ling Han and the others all continued to draw on the fiery flame lightning strike wood. No matter what, they were determined to kidnap it. As expected, with their active display of power, the fiery flame lightning strike wood soon stopped, and then flew over in the direction of Ling Han and his group. Come on, come on. But the good fortune did not last. Only after a while, the fiery flame lightning strike wood stopped again, and then flew on a wavering course in a direction opposite of them. Clearly, Shu Yarong had also discovered something was off, and had increased the effort of seduction. As expected of a previous celestial king, someone capable of standing against the four of them all on her own. Ling Han relaxed his spirit. Boom, the intent realm of the indestructible heaven scroll was completely released, turning into an ocean that wrapped entirely around the fiery flame lightning strike wood. The fiery flame lightning strike wood trembled strongly, and then flew towards Ling Han in a flash. When it arrived in front of him, this ancestral tree turned into a shooting star that sank into Ling Han's forehead. Then, the seal of a tree sapling appeared on his head, but it immediately faded out. The contest had finally come to an end, and Ling Han was the ultimate victor. It could not be helped. The indestructible heaven scroll was too strong. This was a heavenly venerate tier-level cultivation technique, and it was rare to find one that could match it in terms of quality. If it were not for the fact that Shu Yarong had once been a celestial king, and had countless methods, as well as something the likes of the brand of a celestial king, it would have been completely impossible for her to engage in a tug-of-war with Ling Han. She would not even have the chance to interfere. A furious roar of indignant anger rang out from afar. It was Shu Yarong. She had initially thought that she could obtain the fiery flame lightning strike wood, yet all her efforts had come to nothing. She did indeed have a reason for feeling unreconciled. That was because if Ling Han had not been here, she would have been able to collect this ancestral tree without a doubt. Within Ling Han's dantian, the third source power of heaven and earth appeared, causing the two other strong source powers to descend into a power struggle. A fundamental change took place in the circumstances of the lightning source power watching the show from the sidelines. The ancestral tree of heaven and earth was naturally no weaker compared to the Xianyin source water and nine heavens flame, so as proper and expected, it wished to claim its own place. However, how could two great source powers be willing to easily give up some of their own territory? This naturally resulted in an inevitable power struggle. The three source powers fought intensely, and the three sides finally divided the territory into three, each claiming one side for their own. The source power of lightning found a sliver of presence in the crevices, occupying no more than 3 to 4% of the territory in his dantian, its situation all the more miserable. And this wasn't the worst of it, either. As Ling Han's grasp of the regulations of slaughter, time, and space became stronger and stronger, and they gradually became source powers, the space that source power of lightning occupied would be further decreased. Ling Han stretched out his left hand, and with a mental command, that seal of a young sapling immediately appeared on his forehead. Then, a strange power surged, and streaks of green light entwined around his hand, endless vitality spreading out. This was the source power that the fiery flame lightning strike wood had manifested, bestowing on him a strong recovery ability. Though this ancestral tree was constantly being struck by lightning and burnt by fire, it was also precisely because of that it still did not die, so how exuberant was its vitality? Not only could it heal his own injuries, it could also be used on others. Ling Han also had further enlightenment that this was not only effective on its own, but could also refer to the indestructible heaven's scroll, and further improve his self-recovery ability. The indestructible heaven's scroll was also ultimately created from referring to the cultivation techniques of various immortal beasts, and further fused with the comprehension of a heavenly venerate. Thus, the source power of heaven and earth was naturally able to increase its might. This heaven's scroll was more inclined towards defense and recovery. Thus, the source power of wood that he had obtained now was able to lead to unexpected effects. If Ling Han could gain the source power of earth in future, then it definitely would be able to improve his defenses as well. Ling Han, you are so awesome. You are only a 5th severance, but you already have 3 source powers of heaven and earth. Hu Niu exclaimed in excitement, not the slightest bit despondent because she herself had not obtained the source power of heaven and earth. On the side, the Empress was also smiling gracefully, feeling happy for Ling Han. If it had been the Empress or Hu Niu who had obtained this source power of heaven and earth, then Ling Han would also have been happy for them, and not felt the slightest bit of envy. They were a family. Of course, it was a different story whether Hu Niu and the Empress would have felt happy if it had been either of them that had succeeded. It probably would have been very unlikely. Though bewitching Maiden Ru felt that it was a bit of a pity, she astonishingly discovered that she actually did not feel much jealousy, either, causing her to internally sigh. She probably had truly fallen in love with this quarrelsome guy. Otherwise, she would have felt some jealousy, right? We can finally go back. The moment this thought came to being, they felt an incredible longing, and began to rush outside the valley. Though they had taken more than 80 years to reach this place, the majority of their time had been spent on comprehending the true meaning of the Great Tao and the heaven-destroying 9 swords. Thus, when it came time for them to leave, it was naturally much shorter. In a mere 3 months' time, they had already arrived in the proximity of the valley entrance. So many prodigies have died this time round, and when the news spreads out, it will probably cause huge waves, Ling Han said ruefully. First, Ji Wuming had eliminated a great number of them, and then Ling Han himself had killed 6 of them. By now, there were probably just 5 or 6 left of the monarch tiers of the wide prosperity heaven, not much more than the calm peace heavens. Furthermore, one still had to take into consideration that there were a good number of reincarnations of celestial kings among the monarch tiers of the wide prosperity heaven. There were actually pitifully few prodigies that had depended on their own efforts to reach the monarch tier. With such a massive blow, it was unknown how many years the wide prosperity heaven would have to take to fully recover. Chapter 1983, Great Improvement in Art of Alchemy. Chapter 1983, Great Improvement in Art of Alchemy. There was no celestial king standing by at the valley entrance. There were wide implications involved in this journey through the mystery realm, and there were a good number of descendants of even 8th heaven celestial king that had entered into this space, such as Yang Xianlu. Thus, not one celestial king had come here, all seeming to be certain their own heirs would have enough ability to protect themselves. That was the truth as well. Every single monarch tier and emperor tier had a life-saving secret technique bestowed by a celestial king. Unfortunately, they had encountered a maniac called Ji Wuming. They did not even manage to use such techniques, and had simply died directly. This was also a test from the celestial kings for their heirs. Ordinarily speaking, seeing as every single one of them had the backing of a celestial king, even if they were no match for their opponent, it was extremely rare for anyone to deal a fatal blow. Aside from Ji Wuming. Thus, whether it was the wide prosperity heaven or calm peace heaven, both had suffered great losses, but the wide prosperity heaven was more seriously hit by the disaster. Ling Han and his group exited the valley, shook their heads, and set out on their way home. Of course, they were heading back to Alchemy City. This trip to Alchemy City was very time-consuming, and they were even less concerned about how much time they would take. They took multiple stops along the way, and would occasionally enter into seclusion inside the Black Tower. Undergoing comprehension underneath the reincarnation tree naturally had strong effects, and the time also flew by extremely fast. When they returned to Alchemy City, 10 years had already passed on the road. Ling Han and his group all had great improvement. Ling Han, the Empress, and Hu Niu had all cultivated the cultivation level of 5th severance to perfection, and had also gained astonishing improvement in the regulation of slaughter, and had at least completely absorbed the true meaning of the Great Tao, improving their strength with every second. As for truly grasping the heaven-destroying 9 swords, the greater their grasp was over the regulation of slaughter, the the stronger the might this sword technique would show, and there was no limit. Or rather, the limit was Celestial King tier, and it was a height like the 8th heaven or 9th heaven Celestial King tier. Bewitching Maiden Rue was slightly inferior, but as a top-tier Emperor tier of 4th Severance, once she broke through to the Dividing Soul tier, even if there was still a certain distance between her and Monarch tiers like Ling Han, this distance had been endlessly shrunk. At least, it was not a completely one-sided battle, and she could manage an exchange of a few moves, at the very least. Meanwhile, the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden was still making no headway. Thankfully, the lifespan of a Genesis tier was long enough, so there was completely no need for her to worry about death. They left very quietly, and when they returned, it was also very quiet. The 5 of them quietly entered Alchemy City, and practically no one knew about it. It was like they had never even left. Ling Han first went to pay his greetings to Grandmaster Zi Cheng, and related the rough circumstances of his trip, shocking Grandmaster Zi Cheng to the point of speechlessness. Goodness, this disciple was really too capable of making trouble, wasn't he? Killing a monarch tier that would have to be the heir of at least a 5th heaven or 6th heaven celestial king. Could this matter be easily resolved? In the past, Ling Han had just killed 2 heirs from the Zihei clan and Thundercloud Palace, and he had already caused great trouble. Grandmaster Zi Cheng had expended a tremendous amount of effort, and finally managed to settle this matter. If a 1st heaven celestial king tier force was already so difficult to deal with, then how difficult would 5th heaven, 6th heaven, or even 8th heaven celestial king tier forces be? What was fortunate was that Ling Han had a rock palace behind him. They were not to be trifled with, either. They had a 9th heaven celestial king as protector, the strongest of the celestial realm. He had already caused the trouble, so no amount of regret could be of any help. Grandmaster Zi Cheng did not even bother to reprimand Ling Han, and only told him to concentrate on alchemy. If Ling Han could advance into the ranks of 5-star alchemists, then he really would be capable of becoming an equal of celestial kings. Even high-level celestial kings would have to give him some face, so killing a few heirs would naturally be considered a minor issue. Ling Han returned, and began to focus earnestly on the study of alchemy. He had reached a bottleneck in cultivation. He could not improve further unless he broke through to the Dividing Soul tier, but breaking through to the Dividing Soul tier would require him to go to a specific location. For those like himself, the Empress, and the others, if they wanted to break through to Yang Soul, they would have to go to a place called Yang Soul Ocean. There was not just one Yang Soul Ocean in the Eastern Celestial Realm, but rather a considerable number. For example, the Yang Soul Ocean closest to the Calm Peace Heaven was shared by 7 heavens. Every time it opened, peak stage severing mundane tiers would come there to attempt breaking through to Yang Soul. There were extremely proud prodigies among them, as well as some who had failed many times, and there were also aged elders who had been struck by the Immortal's tribulation to the point of being at their last breath. Undoubtedly, with the peak stage severing mundane tiers of 7 heavens gathered together, every time the Yang Soul Ocean opened, it was naturally incredibly lively. However, the number of severing mundane ancestors was still relatively few, so this number would not much exceed those that had been in the severing mundane valley. The problem was the Yang Soul Ocean would only open once every 100 million years, but Ling Han was quite lucky as he only had to wait 300 years. Otherwise, he definitely would leave the Calm Peace Heaven to search for a Yang Soul Ocean that would be opening soon. If not, and if he'd have to wait tens of millions of years, he would not have that kind of patience. It would be a complete waste of time. But now, he could still afford a wait of 300 years. Ling Han continuously comprehended underneath the reincarnation tree, and concocted alchemical pills in the Black Tower, while his skill in alchemy improved by leaps and bounds. 97 years had already passed in real time, while 90,000 years had passed inside the Black Tower. The time of comprehension underneath the reincarnation tree was even more chillingly long, and Ling Han had finally taken that most crucial step, and become a 3-star alchemist. This was an incredibly astonishing achievement, something that would definitely make every alchemist green with envy. Ling Han was very modest, and did not even exit the Black Tower. Instead, he continued his study of spirit refinement. The skill of spirit refinement determined the heights he could reach in alchemy. Ordinarily, every 4-star alchemist would reach the 5th refinement at least, and it could be claimed that this was the lowest requirement for becoming a 4-star alchemist. Thus, Ling Han now had to first improve his skill in spirit refinement. If he advanced to the 5th refinement, he naturally would be able to push open the doors to becoming a 4-star alchemist, and could be considered a grandmaster himself. Thus, Ling Han continued to concoct alchemical pills to improve his skill in spirit refinement, regardless of the time of day or night. This kind of pill concoction would require him to expend an extraordinary amount of celestial medicine. And how rare was celestial medicine? Yet this wasn't a problem. This was all thanks to Ling Han being the future chairperson of Alchemy City, as well as having a black-hearted businessman know, a master who was a pro at earning money, and the astronomical wealth the latter had accumulated through who knew how many hundreds of millions of years. Whatever kind of ingredient Ling Han needed, Grandmaster Zi Cheng would be able to deliver it to the former at the first instant, and guarantee that Ling Han would not be incapable of concocting alchemical pills. Another 130 years later, Ling Han had gained a tremendous improvement in terms of spirit refinement, successfully advancing to 4th refinement. He was really just a step away from becoming a grandmaster. But taking this step was extremely difficult. Just how many 3-star alchemists were there in Alchemy City? There were not many, but around 1,000 were there, and about 70% of this number was at 3rd refinement, and there was also 30% that had achieved 4th refinement. So at the very least, there were over 300 people whose skill was equal to Ling Han's, but how many of them had broken through to become 4-star alchemists? Farther, there were only Grandmaster Zi Cheng's 3 disciples, and nearer, there was only Lu Jin, and it was just these 3 that had succeeded. This showed how difficult it was, right? Though Ling Han was a super genius at alchemy, if he wanted to break through to become a 4-star alchemist, even if he had the Black Tower and reincarnation tree, the time he needed would be astonishingly long. He studied hard in the Black Tower, not bothering about what was going on in the outside world. Another 50-odd years had passed outside, and there was only a short 3 years left until the Yang Soul Ocean opened. Ling Han was just about to set out when he suddenly received a message from Grandmaster Zi Cheng, asking him to pay him a visit. "I plan to concoct the 3 lives pill, and you can observe from the sidelines," Grandmaster Zi Cheng said. 3 lives pill, a 4-star alchemical pill, one of the 3 types of 4-star alchemical pills that was the hardest to concoct. Why was he suddenly deciding to concoct this? Chapter 1984 Envoy from Western Celestial Realm. Chapter 1984 Envoy from Western Celestial Realm. "Master, wasn't the 3 lives pill lost?" Ling Han asked. This was the largest problem. Since the pill recipe had already been lost, how was it to be practiced then? What more successfully concocting the alchemical pill? Indeed. Alchemist Zi Cheng nodded. "This pill recipe has been lost for a very long time, but I recently found it again." Ha 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 ha. The old geezer was laughing very happily. For a great alchemist, gaining a lost pill recipe was like he had earned a profit of several 100 million star stones. "Congratulations, Master," Ling Han said smilingly, feeling happy for his master. Alchemist Zi Cheng continued, "However, this was not due to me, but rather a fellow alchemist that has come from the Western Celestial Realm, and bestowed this as a gift to Alchemy City." "Oh, the Western Celestial Realm?" Ling Han appeared to be slightly surprised. Aside from Hu Niu, this was his first time hearing of someone from the Western Celestial Realm. As expected of the Western Celestial Realm, not only does their overall level of cultivation surpass that of the Eastern Celestial Realm, they rank above us even in alchemy. Alchemist Zi Cheng felt quite rueful. A simple gift from them already included 3 lost pill recipes, and I really couldn't bring myself to refuse. "Refuse what?" Ling Han asked. "They did not give them for nothing, but rather wished to trade them for a pill recipe," Alchemist Zi Cheng said smilingly. 3 in exchange for 1. It is impossible to refuse this kind of business deal. As expected, the old geezer was in essence still a businessman. "Master has thoroughly grasped the pill recipe?" Ling Han felt that this was a little strange. To say nothing of a 4-star pill recipe, even grasping a 1-star pill recipe would need a very long amount of time, and Alchemist Zi Cheng should have just obtained this pill recipe not too long ago. Close to it. As for the other issues, I'll make improvements as I go. Alchemist Zi Cheng waved a hand dismissively, appearing completely unconcerned. Goodness, every failure would mean wasting a large amount of valuable ingredients, and this was enough to cause a 3-star alchemist tremendous heartache, but the old geezer was completely uncaring. As expected of a rich guy. Ling Han nodded. Earning money was natural for the purpose of spending. Otherwise, if he was a miser that was unwilling to part with the slightest amount, what was the point of living? You come and assist me, Alchemist Zi Cheng said. The master and disciple began their pill concoction. Ling Han was helping primarily for the sake of studying Grandmaster Zi Cheng's techniques. After all, he was presently a 3-star alchemist as well, and had reached the 4th refinement. This was also why Grandmaster Zi Cheng was determined to begin despite not having complete certainty of success. It was not that he was so rich that he had money to burn, but primarily for the sake of setting an example, and providing guidance for Ling Han. Ling Han did not need to learn Grandmaster Zi Cheng's techniques. What he needed was inspiration to create his own sparks. After a year, the master and disciple finally stopped, and under time acceleration effects of 100 times, 100 years had already passed. Grandmaster Zi Cheng was still not sure of successfully concocting the 3 lives pill, but Ling Han had gained much benefit. This did not allow him to advance into the 5th refinement, but his accomplishment at the 4th refinement had improved considerably, and advanced into the level of perfection. This meant that he was considerably closer to the threshold of the 5th refinement. Right, there's another matter, Grandmaster Zi Cheng said. After another 50 years, there will be a gathering hosted by the Western Celestial Realm Gathering of Alchemists. I have decided to send you, firstly because you are my disciple, and secondly because you are also the future chairperson of Alchemy City, so you should go to the Western Celestial Realm and take a look. Ling Han nodded, and said, just fine. I'll use this time to break through to the dividing soul tier first. The opening of the Yang Soul Ocean is close at hand, and that envoy from the Western Celestial Realm just happened to want to break through to dividing soul tier as well, and that was why he was deliberately sent on this trip. Otherwise, if he were to wait for the Yang Soul Ocean closest to the Western Celestial Realm to open up, it would need 700,000 years, Grandmaster Zi Cheng said. Ling Han gave an O, and said, Master, who is this envoy? A young man called Ma Tongguang, but he has cultivated for 900,000 years, and is already a 3-star alchemist, which is very extraordinary, Grandmaster Zi Cheng said, showing a sliver of admiration. As expected of a prodigy nurtured by the Western Celestial Realm. Ling Han couldn't help but nod as well. If the time spent in the time cultivation chamber was taken into account, his age was not too small, either. A 900,000-year-old 3-star alchemist, and one that was about to break through to the dividing soul tier at that, was indeed very amazing. Go and meet him. Grandmaster Zi Cheng looked at his beloved disciple cheerfully. This disciple really had not disappointed him. Whether it was cultivation or alchemy, he was not inferior to a prodigy of the Western Celestial Realm, which made him feel sincerely gratified. Ling Han nodded, and after bidding Grandmaster Zi Cheng farewell, he went to the manor for honored guests situated on the 4th level. This place was specifically used for the purpose of entertaining mighty figures of the ascending origin tier and above. Ma Tongguang's cultivation level was indeed not enough, but he was presently the alchemy representative of the Western Celestial Realm, so he was qualified to reside in the manor for honored guests on the 4th level. The moment Ling Han entered, he discovered that this was a very lively place. Goodness, it was filled with an ocean of faces, and was close to bursting at the seams. Holy Sun, Lord Holy Sun. When they saw Ling Han, those at the sidelines were first surprised, and then paid their respectful greetings in a hurry. Though Ling Han was already certain to be the future chairperson of Alchemy City, as long as Grandmaster Zi Cheng had not abdicated, Ling Han was still only the Holy Sun. However, there were 10 Holy Sons previously, and now Ling Han was the sole heir. Who could be disrespectful when they saw the future chairperson? In truth, there were a considerable number of people in Alchemy City that wanted to curry favor with Ling Han, but the latter would either be concocting alchemical pills, or would be out on training trips, so they did not even have a chance. Ling Han nodded, and smilingly said, Is everyone lining up here to wait for the summons of that Ma Tongguang? That person immediately flushed, appearing to be stuttering. Just like Ling Han had said, everyone had really come here because they wanted to be summoned by Ma Tongguang, and their purpose was naturally to form affable relations with Ma Tongguang. That person was the envoy of the Western Celestial Realm, and a prodigy of alchemy at that. If they could gain his favor, and he was willing to make introductions for them, they would be able to go to the Western Celestial Realm and develop further in future. The overall level of cultivation of the Western Celestial Realm was clearly much higher than the Eastern Celestial Realms. It could be said that if you could cultivate to the severing mundane tier in the Eastern Celestial Realm, then you would have 30% higher chances of breaking through to the dividing soul tier in the Western Celestial Realm. Thus, for a brighter future, everyone had come here to form connections with Ma Tongguang. Holy Sun! Holy Sun! The others had spotted Ling Han as well, and hurriedly paid their greetings to him, feeling slightly embarrassed. This was natural. The future chairperson was in front of them, yet they were fawning on an outsider, so their faces were flushed with shame. Grass is greener on the side of the Western Celestial Realm, Ling Han stated smilingly, and these words caused a considerable number to lower their heads, but there were some that were still unconcerned. As the saying went, it was in man's nature to strive for better, so wasn't this very normal? After Ling Han said these words, he strode forwards, and the crowd separated. At present, in Alchemy City, there were only the 3 4-star grandmasters that had higher status than Ling Han. Holy Sun Ling, when he arrived in front of Ma Tongguang's courtyard, he was stopped from going further at the entrance. Lu Xianming. He looked at Ling Han with a smile, but there was a sliver of mockery in his eyes. Are you here to see young Master Ma? Please wait here then, and allow me to announce your presence. He looked completely like a vile character that had gotten into a position of power, becoming conceited and arrogant. Chapter 1985, Take Refuge with Me. Chapter 1985, Take Refuge with Me. This was Alchemy City. Ling Han was the future chairperson of Alchemy City, and he actually had to wait at the entrance for someone to announce his arrival. This was a straightforward provocation. Ling Han shook his head. Initially, Lu Xianming could be considered a genius, but now he had actually descended to become someone else's lowly servant. Furthermore, it was at the entrance to his own residence. This really was a complete and utter disgrace. Lu Xianming, to think that I thought of you as a rival, this was my mistake, Ling Han said with a smile. Then, his face darkened, and he said, What are you all gathered around here for? Do whatever you all have to do. Who would dare disregard the command of the future chairperson? Immediately, the people in the surroundings left, and it was fortunate enough that Ling Han would not pursue the matter. Of course, they had left now, but it was uncertain when they would come back. After all, Ling Han couldn't possibly stand guard here forever, right? Lu Xianming fixed his eyes on Ling Han, his gaze menacing. As he saw it, the fact that he had fallen to this level was all Ling Han's fault. If it were not for Ling Han's appearance, the person that would have been in his position now would be him. As he looked at it, inheriting the position of chairperson of Alchemy City was only proper and expected. In fact, he had not wanted to become completely hostile with the other Holy Sons, and merely stayed on the defense. He had thought that with the passing of time, his rise to the pinnacle could no longer be stopped, and the other Holy Sons and Holy Daughters like Oyu Khan would soon become the subordinates under his rule, so he did not wish any single one of them to be lost. Power could only be reflected by having talented people, and ruling over prodigies would give a stronger feeling of accomplishment. But all of this had been ruined by Ling Han. He was filled with hate and fury. Thankfully, a wonderful chance had suddenly appeared. The Holy Land of Alchemy of the Western Celestial Realm had actually sent an envoy, and Lu Xianming had also successfully made connections. In the future, he would be able to leave the Eastern Celestial Realm with Ma Tongguang. He was sure that with his natural talent, he would definitely be capable of surpassing Ma Tongguang many years later, and flourish in the Western Celestial Realm. By then, Ling Han would only be a minor character like a frog at the bottom of a well. Not only did the Western Celestial Realm have a higher overall level of cultivation, its level of alchemy was also considerably higher than the Eastern Celestial Realms. At least, There were 5-star alchemists in the Western Celestial Realm. When Lu Xianming became a 4-star Grandmaster, he would return in glory, and let these people of Alchemy City know just how wrong they had been. To actually refuse to choose him as the future chairperson, now that he had seen Ling Han, he could not withhold the jealousy in his heart, and deliberately provoked him. Holy Son Ling is truly overbearing. Lu Xianming suppressed the fury in his heart. Don't forget you are not Lord Chairperson yet. Pa. Ling Han gave him a slap. With his strength as a peak stage 5th severance, how could Lu Xianming possibly be able to block it? Instantly, he was struck dizzy by this slap. He had just barely managed to steady his footing, and a sliver of blood was seeping from the corner of his lips, his hair disheveled, looking extremely pathetic. Ling Han withdrew his hand, and calmly stated, "Don't you forget either that you are no longer a holy son. If you treat me with disrespect, to say nothing of just a slap, even if I had you executed, no one would say anything to the contrary." It was as if Lu Xianming's eyes could shoot fire, but just as Ling Han had said, he was no longer the noble and majestic holy son, but was just an ordinary 2-star alchemist. At most, his future was brighter than the rest's, and he basically could become a 3-star alchemist, but if he wanted to become a 4-star alchemist, this was practically an impossible feat. How was he to compare with Ling Han? Even if he had sustained a slap, he would have to swallow it down. There was nowhere he could go to announce the injustice he had suffered. To dare to provoke the future Lord Chairperson, wasn't it right and proper to slap you? Hihi, Holy Son Ling, you have honored me with your presence, and I have not come out to receive you. Forgive me for the lapse in manners. Just at this moment, a loud laugh rang out, and a young man in fluttering white robes walked out of the doors. He really was extremely handsome, his hair as black as ink and thick, and his eyes as bright as the moon, exuding a captivating spirit. "Young Master Ma." Lu Xianming hurriedly turned around, and bowed towards this white-robed young man. His attitude could be considered extremely respectful. This person was Ma Tongguang, the prodigy of alchemy from the Western Celestial Realm. Ling Han's eyes narrowed, and he smilingly said, "It is I who have lapsed in manners. Brother Ma has already arrived for a number of days, and I have only just come now to pay you a visit." The other, a guest, wanted to overwhelm him, the host, and Ling Han naturally could not give him this chance. Ma Tongguang looked at Ling Han longer, the smile on his face more and more pronounced as he said, "The alchemists of the Eastern and Western Celestial Realm are a family, so where would there be any difference between host and guest?" There was an underlying meaning in his words. Ling Han understood clearly. Ma Tongguang said that the alchemy of the Eastern Celestial Realm and Western Celestial Realm was one family, so there would definitely be a clan leader, right? Then, what right did the Eastern Celestial Realm have to compare to the Western Celestial Realm? They did not even have a 5-star alchemist. Then, if Ling Han admitted that the Eastern and Western Celestial Realm were one and the same, his position as Holy Son and future chairperson of Alchemy City would be more de jure than in fact. That was simple. Without the approval of the clan leader, what right did you have to become chairperson here? It was only a few words, but there was already a deep trap hidden there. This was no simple character. Ling Han chuckled, and said, "All the alchemists in the world share the same path, and the Eastern Celestial Realm and Western Celestial Realm are like two brothers. We alchemists of the Eastern Celestial Realm have less wealth, so we would still have to ask for more help from the brothers in the Western Celestial Realm. Even with brothers, clear accounts had to be kept, what more when it concerned interfering in the internal affairs of the other. Thus, it was best that they each minded their own business." Ma Tongguang paused slightly, and then broke out into laughter, as if he was very pleased. Ling Han only smiled faintly. He could not bother himself to keep up superficial appearances with the other party. Brother Ling would definitely be representing Grandmaster Zi Cheng to attend the gathering of alchemy in the Western Celestial Realm, right? Ma Tongguang suddenly changed the topic. "That's right." Ling Han nodded. "That is precisely why I have come." Lu Xianming immediately revealed an expression of jealousy. If Ling Han had not been there in his way, the person who would have had this chance would have been him. How grand it would be, representing the whole world of alchemy of the Eastern Celestial Realm. But now, He could only participate as the friend of Ma Tongguang, and this was putting it in a nice way. If one was blunter, then he would just be a lackey, or an underling. Who would care about a person like him? Originally, he had been the holy son of Alchemy City, and would have been surrounded by people everywhere he went, and now he had fallen from the heavens right down to rock bottom, which was something he could not get used to no matter what. And with this, he had also understood why Oyu Khan and the others were so determined to eliminate him previously, without any care for their kinship as fellow alchemists. The temptation of power was really too big. Now, if he was given a chance to get rid of Ling Han, he would definitely make use of this chance, whatever the cost. Ma Tongguang said, "Brother Ling, after you reach the Western Celestial Realm, you will realize that the level of the Eastern Celestial Realm is really too low. To say nothing of anything else, merely in terms of 4-star alchemists, we have a total number of 3,655 that have been recorded in the Western Celestial Realm. This disparity was too large, wasn't it? There were only 10 4-star alchemists in the entire Eastern Celestial Realm, and this was counting in those few that had long since become hermits. It was unknown whether they were still even alive now. After all, without becoming a celestial king, there would ultimately come a day when they would be killed by the Immortals' tribulation. More than 3,600 4-star alchemists, this was really too astonishing. Ling Han gave an "oh," and said, "Then there is really quite a number. Brother Ling, though you can also be considered young and promising, your chance of becoming a 4-star alchemist is 1 in a million, Ma Tongguang stated evenly. However, if you take refuge with me, with my help, to say nothing of 4-star alchemist, even becoming a 5-star alchemist would not be impossible. 5-star alchemist was the existence that was truly an equal of a celestial king." Chapter 1986, Setting Out for the Young Soul Ocean. Chapter 1986, Setting Out for the Young Soul Ocean. The jealousy in Lu Xianming's eyes became even more pronounced. He could only ever dream of becoming a 5-star alchemist. Furthermore, with this comparison, the gulf between himself and Ling Han was practically overwhelming. He had taken the initiative to seek out Ma Tongguang, curried favor with him, and the latter still treated him uncaringly. In the end, he was finally accepted, and he was allowed to perform duties like a doorman. Though this was slightly humiliating, it had ultimately won him a chance to go to the Western Celestial Realm. Furthermore, if others wanted to seek an audience with Ma Tongguang, they would need Lu Xianming to announce them, and they, too, would have to curry favor with him, which brought back to him the feeling of superiority that he had dearly missed. But in Ling Han's case, Ma Tongguang was the one to invite him himself. Furthermore, he had even promised that the other party would definitely become a 4-star Grandmaster, and there was hope of advancing to 5 stars. Lu Xianming's hands balled into tight fists at this. In fact, even his nails had sunk deeply into his flesh. He had no choice but to lower his head, or he feared that he would lose control of the flames burning fiercely in his eyes, causing others to mock and jeer at him. Ling Han showed an expression of understanding. The other side had gone around in a circle, but his true purpose was still to return to the topic that they had begun with. Ma Tongguang wanted to gain authority over Alchemy City. As for the reason why a person of the Western Celestial Realm would be interested in the Alchemy City of the Eastern Celestial Realm, Ling Han could not guess. However, a mere 3-star alchemist actually dared to boast so shamelessly? Heh. Ling Han shook his head, and said, "I appreciate it, but I have never had the habit of being someone's helper. That was the case in the past, it is the same now, and it will not change in the future, either." Ma Tongguang looked at Ling Han, a smile curving up his lips as he said, "I am sure you will regret this. I have only come to tell you that it is about time to set out to the young soul ocean, but as for other issues, you had best not think too far ahead," Ling Han said evenly, clear displeasure evident in his tone. Ma Tongguang slowly nodded. "I am already prepared, and can set out any time. However, I wish to ask for someone from you, Brother Ling." And that is this Brother Lu." Ma Tongguang pointed at Lu Xianming. "Brother Lu and I have become friends at first sight, and I plan to invite him to the Western Celestial Realm as a guest, so I hope Brother Ling would allow it." Ling Han couldn't help but smile, and said, "Alchemy City has never clasped shackles on any of our alchemists. Every single person is free, so why should my approval be sought? Whether he is willing or not to leave with Brother Ma is his own personal affair, and none of my concern. Since Brother Ling does not disagree, that is good, Ma Tongguang said smilingly. Then, my heart can rest at ease. We set out 10 days later. Ling Han said these last words, and left. Young Master Ma, I was right, wasn't I? Ling Han is an incredibly arrogant man, and would not accept young Master Ma's invitation. Lu Xianming approached, looking very much like a nasty character. Ma Tongguang showed a smile filled with utter pride. Believe me, whoever I set my eye on, there is not one of them that will not ultimately submit to me. Lu Xianming quickly nodded, but he did not agree internally. His understanding of Ling Han far surpassed Ma Tongguang's. If Ling Han had really been someone that could so easily be bribed or submit to another, then Ling Han wouldn't have possibly reached such a high station by now. He did not have the slightest intention of pointing this out. Firstly, even if he did, Ma Tongguang might not believe him, either, and secondly, he hoped more for Ling Han and Ma Tongguang to turn against one another instead of the latter taking the former as a subordinate. What position would he be in by then? Ling Han returned to his quarters. When he told the Empress and the others about Ma Tongguang, the women were all raging furiously. Who did this guy think he was, to actually dare to want their husband as his subordinate? Niu will go destroy him. Niu rolled up her sleeves, blazing with killing intent. Ling Han held the little girl back. This little girl was rash and bustling, and was definitely not joking around when she said she would kill someone. Even if you want to commit murder, you can't do it here, he said, actually quite devious himself. Niu immediately understood. After we go to the Yang Soul Ocean, we'll kill this guy. Ling Han only smiled in response. If Ma Tongguang was really so insensible, and so determined to court his own death, he would not mind sending him off to the afterlife. However, if others did not come to trifle with him, he would not kill others out of boredom, either. This was not a matter that brought him pleasure. They made some slight preparations, and 10 days later, Ling Han went to inform Ma Tongguang that they could set out. It was definitely not just Ling Han and Ma Tongguang that would be going off on this trip to the Yang Soul Ocean. There were a considerable number of people who had waited more than 100 million years, all for the sole purpose of this opening of the Yang Soul Ocean. Indeed, there were other places that had Yang Soul Oceans, but there was basically no one that would dare travel across such a far distance. Who knew? They could die on their way there, so what was the point then? 100 million years, for a peak stage severing mundane tier elite, was really no big deal. They just had to wait a bit of time, and it would be over before they knew it. Anyone could afford the wait. Unless it was that kind of old monster that had passed hundreds of billions, or even thousands of billions of years in the severing mundane tier, and had endured enough suffering from the immortals' tribulation. Then, they definitely would be constantly anticipating the opening of the Yang Soul Ocean, which could give them the hope of extending their lifespan. Brother Ling, we meet again. MMA Tongguang appeared, his hands crossed behind his back. Lu Xianming followed closely behind him. This ex-Holy Son's head was slightly lowered, his demeanor extremely humble, and he had gotten completely adapted to his identity, that of a lackey. Ling Han nodded, and said, "Let's set out then." Ma Tongguang showed a cold smirk. He was already throwing out commands. Did he really think that there was anything so impressive about being the Holy Son of Alchemy City? Would you believe that I can suppress you with one hand? Ma Tongguang looked down very much on the people of the Eastern Celestial Realm, not only in terms of alchemy, but also cultivation. That was because not only was he a prodigy of alchemy, he was also a prodigy of cultivation. He had delivered the 5th severance, and was a monarch tier among cultivators. Monarch tiers, to say nothing of the fact that there were pitifully few of them in the Eastern Celestial Realm, there were only a limited number of them even in the Western Celestial Realm. There would only be a dozen or so in a single heaven, and some greater heavens would have slightly more, but there would only be 100 at most. It should be known, just how many years and how many generations had they been accumulated over? How big was the population of the Celestial Realm? Even with this, the total number of monarch tiers that could be produced would not exceed 1000. This was referring to a single time period because some monarch tiers had already advanced into the dividing soul tier, immortal palace tier, or even ascending origin tier and celestial king tier. In a tiny place like Alchemy City, he, as a 5th severance monarch tier, was naturally invincible, and what severing mundane tier emperor tier could sustain a single blow from him? In the future, you will come to understand just how vast the gap is between you and me. Ma Tongguang's eyes drifted, and when they swept over the Empress, Hu Niu, and bewitching Maiden Ru, his pupils dilated involuntarily, and he looked stunned. These 3 women were truly beautiful, with exquisiteness that he had never glimpsed before. But such delicate beauties were actually all Ling Han's women? Ma Tongguang was stunned, but at the same time filled with envy towards Ling Han. Even if he cultivated both martial arts and alchemy, and who knew how many top-tier beauties would willingly throw themselves into his arms usually, none of them could match any single one of these 3 women. It looked like he definitely had to subdue Ling Han. By then, he only had to slightly show a sliver of opinion, and Ling Han would take the initiative to present these 3 women to him. As Ma Tongguang thought this, an involuntary smile curled up the corners of his lips, making him look very vulgar. Chapter 1987 Ma Tongguang was displeased. Chapter 1987 Ma Tongguang was displeased. Ling Han saw the changes in Ma Tongguang's facial expression clearly, and humphed softly. He did not bother with how others thought, but if the other party dared put his thoughts into action, Ling Han would definitely not hold anything back. Ma Tongguang withdrew his gaze from the 3 women, and said to Ling Han, "Brother Ling is really very fortunate, having 4 beautiful wives, each more exquisite than the last. You have good taste," Hu Niu declared boldly, looking completely innocent. Involuntarily, Ma Tongguang stared slightly. That innocent cuteness of Hu Niu was extremely deceptive, and his heart throbbed wildly. However, monarch tears were monarch tears, after all, so his temperament was firm. He showed a smile, and asked, "How should I address you, miss?" "Niu is Ling Han's Hu Niu," Hu Niu declared. Suddenly, she glared at Ma Tongguang. Triangular eyes, Niu warns you not to have any ideas about Niu, or Niu would definitely rape your *s. After she had seen Ling Han use an iron spear to rape some unlucky fellows *s before, she was quite eager to try it out herself. Ma Tongguang was struck speechless. That pure, unsullied appearance of Hu Niu was practically like an unearthly fairy, but the moment she opened her mouth, she was shockingly bold. This discrepancy was really too wide, wasn't it? Ling Han smiled faintly, and said, "Let's set out then." He naturally had no interest in introducing the Empress and the others to Ma Tongguang. Ma Tongguang smirked internally. He would definitely make Ling Han submit to him, and then he would have another powerful subordinate, and Hu Niu and the other women would not be able to escape the palm of his hand. Of course, with his great skill and strategy, subduing a subordinate that could be of great use was his primary motive. As for women, they were only objects to add some spice to his life. The group set out, riding on a warship, and heading out towards the Yang Soul Ocean. This Yang Soul Ocean was not within the borders of the Calm Peace Heaven, but rather within the 3 capitals' heaven. Geographically speaking, there were 6 heavens that were nearer to this place. Hence, the severing mundane tiers of these 6 heavens would come to this location to break through to the dividing soul tier. The Calm Peace Heaven and Wide Prosperity Heaven were both included among them, and the overall strength of the 3 capitals heaven could be ranked in the middle echelon of the 33 heavens, far from what the Calm Peace Heaven could hope to compare to. This warship did not only carry Ling Han and his group, but also a great number of severing mundane tiers from Alchemy City, and the whole warship was practically stuffed to the brim with their numbers. Ling Han and the others shared one chamber, but they usually would not come out at all. Instead, they would be cultivating inside the Black Tower. Though they had reached a bottleneck in their cultivation level, they could focus more of their effort on regulations. For example, Ling Han focused on cultivating the 2 regulations of fire and water. Because he had the source powers of these 2 regulations inside his body, he had long since cultivated these 2 regulations to the limits that a 5th severance could reach. But now that he had newly gained the source power of wood, he naturally could begin from 0 in terms of this regulation, and advance it to the level of the severing mundane tier. There were the regulations of time, space, and slaughter as well. He could comprehend them inside the Black Tower itself, and similarly would be able to advance them to the peak stage of the fifth severance. Thus, there would only be a lack of time to spend, and he would definitely not be grumbling about having too much free time. Initially, Ma Tongguang had wanted to seek Ling Han out for a chat, and exude his domineering aura so Ling Han would submit to his authority, but Ling Han didn't even give him the chance for a meeting, so the other party could only exclaim at his helplessness, and stay and brood inside his own chambers. In the blink of an eye, more than a year's time had passed. The warship had carried the several hundred people into the three capitals' heaven. There was still about a month of travel left until they would reach their actual destination, so it was still quite far. Another month later, the warship stopped. So this was the Yang Soul Ocean? Ling Han exited the Black Tower, and arrived on the deck. As he stretched out his head to look, a confused expression appeared on his face. Though it was true that looking down from a higher position, all objects would shrink down in size, the problem now was that the ocean below them was really too small. At most, it could only be called a small lake. This is only the entrance to the Yang Soul Ocean. It was unknown when Ma Tongguang had made his way onto the deck as well. He seemed to have spotted Ling Han's confusion, and began to explain, the true Yang Soul Ocean is definitely worlds apart from here, and is so expansive that it could not be described with words. He paused, and then continued, it is said that the earlier one enters the Yang Soul Ocean, the greater the rewards will be. Ma Tongguang stopped again, and looked at Ling Han, as if anticipating a question from him. Ling Han simply smiled in reply, paying him no more attention. Ma Tongguang couldn't help but show a sliver of anger in his expression at this rebuff. When he had been in the Western Celestial Realm, he only had to open his mouth, and what Emperor Tyr would not be overwhelmed by his favor, but a minor character from the Eastern Celestial Realm actually dared to ignore him like this. Fine then. When you become subservient to me, I will make it so you bow every day, and greet me with an incredibly humble posture. Everyone disembarked from the warship. It really was a small lake beneath them, and countless people had already gathered in the vicinity. The majority of them were invigorated and energetic youths, but there was also a small number of grey-haired elderly. Some had even lost all their hair, and they were all people whose lifespans were close to being completely erased by the Immortals' tribulation. If they did not break through to the dividing soul tier, their remaining lifespan would really be numbered. Brother Ling, someone called out. Who else was it if not Yang Xianlu? He strode over, his gait majestic. Yi, who is this brat? Yang Xianlu would actually approach him personally. Definitely no ordinary person. Though the calm peace heaven is only a small place, Yang Xianlu is a prodigy that was born on the celestial path, and his strength is nothing to be underestimated. Che, so what? If he was in our Star Dragon capital, he probably wouldn't even be able to rank in the top 100. Haha, you are exaggerating too much. Yang Xianlu is a monarch tier, and how many monarch tiers are there in your Star Dragon capital? Those who saw this scene were all discussing it spiritedly. After all, Yang Xianlu was the strongest of the younger generation of the Calm Peace Heaven. Even if the Calm Peace Heaven's overall level of cultivation was a little low, being able to reign supreme in a heaven was still quite amazing. Brother Yang. Ling Han also nodded in greeting towards Yang Xianlu. And this is... Yang Xianlu looked towards Ma Tongguang, showing a sliver of surprise in his expression. That was because he discovered that Ma Tongguang's bearing was very strong, which made him become serious. To manage to get such a reaction from him, this person was definitely extraordinary. I am Ma Tongguang, and have come from the Western Celestial Realm. Ma Tongguang smiled slightly, appearing to be very gentle. The Western Celestial Realm, but these three words seemed to carry a spell. Instantly, it caused an explosion among the masses. Though the Western Celestial Realm and Eastern Celestial Realm were equals, the Eastern Celestial Realm had always been weaker than the Western Celestial Realm. This was a publicly acknowledged fact. If one could go to the Western Celestial Realm, then against a more or less similar backdrop, everyone's limit of cultivation could possibly be raised a bit higher, and the chances of this happening was at least as much as 30%. Brother Ma. Yang Xianlu, too, did not dare be rude, raising his clasped hands in Ma Tongguang's direction. However, Monarch tears naturally had their reservedness. This greeting was not very warm or passionate. Ma Tongguang showed a slightly prideful expression. This was the Eastern celestial realm that he had imagined. Once they found out that he was a prodigy of the Western celestial realm, all of them would be like flies that had smelt blood, trying as much as possible to gather around him. "Yi, Grandmaster Ling," a voice filled with pleasant surprise rang out, and a young man squeezed his way out of the crowd. He bowed respectfully towards Ling Han, as if he was a disciple that had met his master, incredibly sincere and reverent. "Ian, what was going on here?" Ma Tongguang showed an expression of disbelief. "Haven't you heard that I have come from the Western celestial realm? And you actually did not curry favor with me, but rather chose to treat a nobody so respectfully? This was practically inconceivable, and completely unreasonable. It had to be Ling Han that had deliberately arranged such a scene." Chapter 1988, All Gathered. Chapter 1988, All Gathered. This was really too shameless. Just to show off his superiority in front of Ma Tongguang, Ling Han actually had people come to act as his admirers. This was really shamelessness without any lower limit. Ma Tongguang smirked coldly. Did Ling Han think that just because he had found someone to put on an act, Ma Tongguang would fall for it? He was really too dumb, and too naive. He swept an eye over these actors. They were all very young, and they were all only one-star alchemists. They did not have any weight to speak of. "TSK, couldn't you find someone with some more weight to put on the act?" "Grandmaster Ling." Ma Tongguang had not finished this thought when he saw yet another person walk over. He was similarly very young, but the badge worn on his chest showed that his identity was a two-star alchemist. Ling Han nodded smilingly. In the past, he had given a lecture and explained the basics of alchemy, benefiting who knew how many people. Even three-star alchemists were very grateful to him and called him Grandmaster, which was proof of Ling Han's prestige. However, it was easy for others to remember Ling Han, but if Ling Han had to remember each and every one of these admirers, that would really be too hard. Furthermore, he had not deliberately made the effort to memorize their names, either. At that time, he had left after he had finished his lecture, and did not use this chance to establish a prestigious reputation for himself. "I am Sun Feng." This young man hurriedly introduced himself. "After I listened to Grandmaster Ling's lecture, I have been filled with gratitude towards Grandmaster Ling. However, I have not had the chance to express my thanks towards Grandmaster Ling. I had not thought that I would actually be able to come to the Yang Soul Ocean together with Grandmaster Ling this time. It really is my honor. Brother Sunday." Ling Han smiled slightly at him. "No. Sun Feng hurriedly said very humbly, his tone bearing excitement. Being able to gain the recognition of his idol really made him too elated. "Yi, this act was really quite real." Ma Tongguang saw this, and couldn't help but smirk internally. He had just thought that the previous actors did not bear enough weight, and he had not expected a second one had immediately come over. "Fine then, just continue with your pretense." "Master Ling, Master Ling, Master Ling." More and more people spotted Ling Han, and all came over, greeting Ling Han warmly. Furthermore, those that could garner a nod from Ling Han all looked extremely excited, appearing to be incredibly pleased. From the initial more than dozen people to several dozens of people, to over 100, and then several hundred. There was practically an ocean of people surrounding Ling Han. In fact, Ma Tongguang and Lu Xianming had even been pushed out of the crowd. Fuck, what was going on here? Ma Tongguang was a little blank. With the memory of a celestial, he naturally remembered clearly just how many people had boarded the warship, and he was certain that there was not one person among them that had disembarked from the warship. It would have been easy to set up one or two actors, but several hundred to over 1,000 would be difficult. Moreover, these people were all peak stage severing mundane tears. Ma Tongguang suddenly realized that he had underestimated Ling Han. This holy son of Alchemy City did not seem like an ordinary character. Perhaps it was not that he had underestimated Ling Han, but had rather underestimated the entire Eastern Celestial Realm, and had thus thought that anyone coming from this place was lowly and lacking in ability. He only had to show some of his domineering aura, and he would be able to make them submit to him easily. The truth had proven that a few prodigies would emerge from a place, and there would be a rare few individuals that were stunning without compare. Viciousness flashed through his eyes. Ma Tongguang was fond of taking in prodigies, and the prouder they were, the more challenging they would be to him. However, when someone had reached an extent capable of posing a threat to him, he would no longer bear the intention of taking them as subordinate. Instead, he would erase them without mercy. Ling Han seemed to have this kind of tendency. What made Ma Tongguang even more uncomfortable was the fact that there were more and more people coming over to pay their greetings to Ling Han. In fact, they were not just 2-star alchemists. Even a few 3-star alchemists had come over, all of them gray-haired and aged, suffering the torture of the immortal's tribulation. If they did not break through to the dividing soul tier, the end of their lifespan would be close at hand. 3-star alchemist. Ma Tongguang finally lost his calm composure. He was indeed an alchemy prodigy. He had practiced alchemy for less than 1,000,000 years, and had already become a 3-star alchemist. In fact, this was something that even a considerable number of 4-star alchemists could not have hoped to do in the past. But to have a 3-star alchemist bow down to him in worship? Sorry, this was a completely impossible feat. All of them were of the same level, so who would come and bow to him? The world of alchemy did not have a rule that stated that others should come to bow to you because you were a prodigy. Yet Ling Han had accomplished this. This caused envy to rise up in Ma Tongguang's heart, and his killing intent blazed. Die, he declared internally, completely dismissing the thought of taking Ling Han as subordinate. He had to erase Ling Han, and it had to be done as soon as possible, at all costs. Otherwise, when Ling Han went to the Western Celestial Realm, who knew if mighty figures of alchemy would take note of Ling Han, and thus take him in as disciple? By then, it would no longer be possible to get rid of Ling Han. No one would dare. Lu Xianming caught sight of the changes in Ma Tongguang's expression, and smirked internally. He had long since predicted that Ma Tongguang had only been carried away by his own wishful thinking. In the end, he would still turn hostile to Ling Han, just like how Lu Xianming had once done. However, at the time, his heart had been too soft, and he had not dealt a fatal blow at the first instance. In the end, when he was about to rise in revolt, Ling Han's victory was already established, and he was too late. He hoped that Ma Tongguang would definitely not follow in his footsteps this time. Ling Han became a center of focus. As long as they were alchemists, they would come to greet him. Even if there were some among them that had not gone to participate in the celebration, they had still heard a retelling from others later. They, too, were very grateful to Ling Han, and as word spread, Ling Han's reputation became more and more resounding. Fortunately, alchemists were ultimately rare and few, and there were even fewer that just happened to be at the peak stage of the severing mundane tier. A few days later, peace returned to Ling Han. "Brother Ling, you are more awesome than I am," Yang Xianlu said sincerely. "In the past, though I have been called the strongest of the young generation of the Calm Peace Heaven, with countless people admiring me, that was only just limited to the Calm Peace Heaven, but you have already reached the extent of the entire Eastern Celestial Realm, Brother Ling." Ling Han laughed loudly, and said, "It is just a coincidence. Nyo's Ling Han is the best." Hu Nyo declared cheerily without the slightest bit of reservation as she clung onto one of Ling Han's arms. "Brother Ling is indeed awesome. However, the 3 capitals heaven can be ranked in the middle echelon in the Eastern Celestial Realm, and has countless prodigies," Yang Xianlu said solemnly. "Their strongest prodigy is called the Madman, and his real name is Lu Heng. He is well known as a maniac of cultivation. The moment he gets into a fight, he is completely oblivious to all else. It is said that there is not a single person in the 3 capitals heaven that does not fear him." Ling Han couldn't help but feel intrigued, and said, "Then, I really would like to meet him." Yang Xianlu was first startled, and then smiled in spite of himself. "I should have thought so. Brother Ling is that type of person." In truth, he himself was that kind of character too. However, he had gone on a trip to the wide prosperity heaven, and had found out that he really was a frog at the bottom of a well. Thus, he faced them as a competitor, no longer the high and noble king waiting for those inferior to him to issue challenges he had once been. Since they had the free time now, Yang Xianlu began to speak of some glorious affairs of Lu Heng. When Ling Han heard this, he was sure that Lu Heng's name, the madman, was definitely not rashly given. He indeed was incredibly crazy. This was a monster that lived on battle. Hey, 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 have you heard? Someone suddenly exclaimed in a high voice. When someone said these words, he had to be certain that others did not know what he was going to say, so he could satisfy his vanity, making everyone look towards him. True enough, when everyone looked over, that person showed a proud smile, and said, "The latest news, the madman has just been defeated." Chapter 1989, The Madman was defeated. Chapter 1989, The Madman was defeated. What? The madman had been defeated? Immediately, a commotion erupted in the crowd. A lot of people looked disbelieving, and thought that this was nothing but a mere rumor. He, it's not the first time that the madman has been defeated. Someone shook their head. This madman dares to challenge even ascending origin tiers, so isn't it very normal that he would be defeated? Ha 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 ha. A great number of people roared with laughter. To say nothing of a severing mundane tier challenging ascending origin tier elites, even against an immortal palace tier, they would be horribly defeated. Even a 5th severance monarch tier like Ling Han could only suppress Yin soul elites and match Earth soul elites at most. There was absolutely no possibility that he could emerge victorious against a heaven soul opponent. Still, how could anyone normal want to challenge an ascending origin tier? Only a maniac like the madman could do something like this. No, the one who defeated the madman was not ascending origin tier. The person who had brought the news immediately shook his head. Then, it would have to be immortal palace tier, someone continued. No. The newsbreaker continued to shake his head. Heaven soul? No. At this, everyone's laughter immediately quieted down. If this news was true, that would indeed be very shocking. Is it a monarch tier dividing soul tier elite? Someone ventured a guess. A considerable number nodded. Though the madman was the strongest of severing mundane tiers in the 3 capitals heaven, as long as one had advanced into the dividing soul tier, even a king tier would be able to match him. An emperor tier would even be able to suppress him. After all, this was the superior suppression of a major tier. You all have guessed wrongly. The person who defeated the madman isn't a dividing soul tier, but a severing mundane tier as well. That person finally announced a piece of information that was earth-shattering. Impossible. It must be just a rumor. And to think I guessed for so long what elite the madman has gone off to challenge again. As it turned out, it was just rubbish. Completely meaningless. At least 99% of them all shook their heads, completely unwilling to believe this fact. The madman was the strongest severing mundane tier in the 3 capitals heaven, which was equivalent to being the strongest of the surrounding 7 heavens. To declare that a severing mundane tier had been able to defeat him, how could it be anything but a joke? Could it be that the strongest severing mundane tier of the heavens in the above-average ranks, or even higher ranks, had deliberately come here to challenge the madman? The chances of this were practically zero. It's true, that person swore. I swear on my life and wealth that this information is absolutely true without any mistake. The person who defeated the madman was a mysterious person by the name Ji Wuming. It is said that his battle with the madman caused ghosts to weep and gods to howl, the heavens collapsed and the earth quaked. The madman used all techniques that he could, yet was still defeated. In fact, he even almost died. When he fled, only one side of his body was left. When they heard him say this, even more people burst out laughing. This was really too hilarious. Even if there really was someone capable of defeating the madman, how could he have possibly forced him into such dire straits? However, Ling Han's heart jolted. Ji Wuming. That was no ordinary 5th severance monarch tier, but rather one who had once been a celestial king, a 9th heaven celestial king tier. His methods definitely could not be judged by normal standards. His strength was powerful enough to drive anyone to hopeless despair, and the majority of monarch tiers could only look up at him in admiration. If it was said that it was Ji Wuming that had defeated the madman, then Ling Han would not think it the slightest bit strange. Ma Tongguang scoffed, and said, "What Ji Wuming, what madman? They are all frogs at the bottom of a well. In the Western celestial realm, which one of them could lay claim to the name of a prodigy? Ling Han tossed him a glance, and shook his head, but did not say a word. Who was he calling a frog at the bottom of a well? He was the true frog here. Brother Ling, do you think I have spoken wrongly? Ma Tongguang suddenly directed his assault on Ling Han. Overwhelmingly wrong, Ling Han said evenly, not giving him any face at all. Initially, Ling Han had wanted to maintain peaceful relations with the other, but who told this guy to so determinedly take the initiative to trifle with him? He was not a lump of dough that could be squashed at will. Who did he think he was? Brother Ling, are you unconvinced? Ma Tongguang asked menacingly. It was time to let this frog at the bottom of the well know that there were always more talented people in the wider world. Boom. The Empress and Hu Niu moved at the same time. Two snow-white slender palms struck out, and even the heaven and earth instantly paled in color. Neither of them were the type to reason. How dare you? Ma Tongguang humphed coldly. These two women actually dared make a move against him? Humph. Did they think just because they were beautiful, everyone had to coddle and spoil them? But he immediately paled in shock because the attacks of the two women were incredibly fierce, and he felt a tremendous amount of pressure. He hurriedly used his full power. Peng, a frightening shock wave rolled out, and he was instantly sent flying from the blast, quickly turning into a tiny black dot. The Empress and Hu Niu exchanged a look. This was the first time that they thought the other was actually a little pleasing to the eye. Meanwhile, Lu Xianming was dumbfounded with shock. He had always believed in the superior strength of the Western celestial realm, and Ma Tongguang had cultivated both martial arts and alchemy. Not only was he a prodigy of alchemy, he was also a monarch tier in terms of cultivation. In a battle of equal cultivation level, he should have been absolutely invincible. But the joined forces of the two women had sent him flying with a single blow. This. How could he accept this? Ling Han smiled faintly. To Lu Xianming, this was akin to having his whole world collapsing, but to Ling Han, this could not be anything more ordinary. Ma Tongguang was indeed a monarch tier, but he could only be comparable to Yang Xianlu at most. Whether it was the Empress or Hu Niu, they were both slightly stronger than him, and the joined force of the two women was naturally even more frightening. Perhaps, if it had been Ling Han in his place, he, too, would have been sent flying with a single move. The difference was that while Ling Han would have been sent flying, he definitely would not have been wounded. Ling Han didn't bother to deliver a blow to Lu Xianming, and merely swept an unconcerned eye over him, completely dismissing him from his attention. But this kind of contempt made Lu Xianming's whole body tremble. This was due to fury. Just think, he was still a 2-star alchemist at the very least, and in the future, it would be a piece of cake for him to become a 3-star alchemist, though it would be slightly difficult to become a 4-star alchemist. But Ling Han actually couldn't even bother to give him a second glance, which hurt his pride harshly. Damn it. Damn it. Damn it. And the other person that was cursing would be Ma Tongguang. He had only managed to halt his course after crashing into a mountain peak. After pulling himself out of the mountain, he was already so furious that his whole body was shooting flames, but at the same time, he was also filled with wariness. Though he had indeed underestimated his opponent, and though he had been attacked by the two women together, if it had not been that the two women's strength was absolutely powerful, how could they have possibly sent him flying with a single move? The Eastern Celestial Realm actually had such prodigies. Ling Han was indeed his great enemy. Not only was this person's skill in alchemy amazing, he had two powerful helpers by his side. Furthermore, they were world-shakingly beautiful at that, enough to drive anyone to mad jealousy. However, Ling Han himself should not be all that powerful. Ma Tongguang was certain of this. Otherwise, it would not have been the two women attacking just now, but rather Ling Han himself. In the Yang Soul Ocean, he only had to separate Ling Han and the two women, and that would be the time for him to move. Shu Yarong is here, someone suddenly shouted, immediately drawing the eyes of countless others. Shu Yarong, the number one beauty of the wide prosperity heaven who was also an invincible monarch tier. Wherever she went, she would become the center of attention of the masses. Amidst a fluttering of white robes, An exquisite beauty arrived by stepping on air. Her black hair floated like clouds, seemingly elegant and untouched by the mortal world. Who else could it be but Shu Yarong? As her eyes swept over the surroundings, her gaze immediately locked down on Ling Han, showing a menacing killing intent. Because a celestial king from the Rock Palace had stepped out on Ling Han's behalf, the celestial king tier-level forces of the wide prosperity heaven had not caused trouble for Ling Han. It did not mean that they had let Ling Han off the hook, though. Instead, they were going to go by the rules, severing mundane tier versus severing mundane tier, dividing soul tier against dividing soul tier, and would absolutely not bully the weaker party with their superior strength. Of course, this would only happen among celestial king tier-level forces that were closer in strength. Otherwise, if the junior of an ascending origin tier-level killed someone, that definitely would mean an absolute massacre by the celestial king tier-level force. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,